Hello. In today's video we're going to look at the subject of watercolour cauliflowers. Cauliflowers, when produced unintended, can ruin a nice watercolour painting. Cauliflowers and how they're produced are quite often a mystery for new students of watercolour. Consequently, they keep producing them, ruining otherwise nice paintings. In this video I'm going to show you how cauliflowers are produced so that in the future you only produce them when you want to. I'm going to mix a dark mixture of French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Now it doesn't matter which colours we use for this, it's just that these darker colours make it a bit easier for me to show you this process. And I'm going to very quickly paint a flat wash. You don't have to be too careful about this. Cauliflowers are produced when the surface of the paper loses its shine. So right now, this paper has quite a lot of shine on it. So if I was to go in and paint with that, all I would be creating are soft wet on wet effects. So the key conditions for creating a cauliflower are firstly to be painting on a surface that's lost its shine. This hasn't yet. And then to be painting with a brush that has a mixture of paint that is wetter than the damp area you're painting into. I'll demonstrate that shortly, but first I need to let this dry a little bit more. As you can see, it can take some time before the surface of the paper dries to the point where cauliflowers can happen quite easily. And this is one of the reasons why it's often said that a good watercolour is a quick watercolour, because when you paint quickly you have less chance of creating the conditions that create cauliflowers. Alright, so this has lost quite a bit of its shine, still a bit shiny here. We'll just give it about another 30 seconds. There we go. And now you can see these cauliflowers being created. See how what's happening is the water in the paint is pushing the paint on the damp surface to the edge and creating this hard cauliflower effect. When you're painting, it's so important for you to observe how wet or dry the surface of the paper is, the paint consistency of the paint in your brush, and the quantity of paint in your brush. If you have that same weak mix, but you only have a small amount of paint in your brush, you won't create a cauliflower. You might lift some paint. In fact, a common technique for lifting is where you take most of the moisture out of your brush and then in the damp paper lift the paint out. So this is a very valid technique for lifting, which is very different than cauliflowers. If I was to try and do the same but with a very wet brush, you'll now see that instead of lifting paint, we're going to create more of this cauliflower effect. And you can just see here how it's starting to push the paint to the edge. So the lesson from this is when you're painting, don't paint into your paper without first having a good awareness of just how wet the surface of your paper is. Otherwise, you'll create these cauliflowers, and depending on how dry the paper is when they're created, you may or may not be able to fix them. I'm now going to cover a few instances where you can actually fix a cauliflower depending on its size and its position. I'll mix some more paint. The reason I'm removing this water from the tape is what can happen is as the paper dries and it starts getting to the stage where it's lots of shine around the edge, if some of that water that's on the tape touches the damp paper, it can be sucked in and you'll have cauliflowers created around the edge. If they're small ones, it doesn't matter, because typically when you frame a painting, you're going to lose some space around the edges anyway. But if it's a lot of water and it encroaches too much into your painting, then it can ruin it. Now, one of the ways that cauliflowers are sometimes produced, people see their paper drying and they decide, well, they'll spray it to keep the surface workable. But instead of holding the bottle above the paper so that only the tiniest drops land on the paper, they point at the paper, and then they're even very tentative as to how they press the bottle. And what happens is you end up with these dots here, which are mini cauliflowers. Okay. Now, when that happens, there is a number of things you can do. As long as no area has totally dried, you can pick up your brush and go back over that. And just re-establish the underpainting. Okay. And that's fine. That technique works as long as you catch the problem quickly and it's at a stage like this where you've just got, you know, a large wash without a lot of detail that you would have to paint around. Now we've got to let that dry again. Just to speed this up, I will get the hairdryer on this to remove some of the water. Sometimes you might create a small cauliflower. I'll just create one there. If you catch it quickly, you can just take the moisture out of your brush and then just lift wetness out of the middle of it and along the edges. Now that doesn't remove the cauliflower, but it leaves it so that the shape is still quite small. So later, if this was a landscape, you might be able to paint a tree branch or something like that through it. Whereas if you just left it and it just continued to grow, then your painting could be ruined. Cauliflowers can also be used to help you create other shapes. Like if I wanted to create maybe some cloud shapes. This is a bit too dry to create a cauliflower there, but here you can see it's pushing the paint to the edges. And then once you've got the shape you're interested in, you can clean your brush, take out most of the water, and then just lift out the surface water. This is useful if you're painting skies, especially lighter clouds in a dark sky, and you can create some quite interesting shapes. Now you can create the same effect just by using a damp brush and lifting the paint. However, it doesn't tend to give you such a clean look, because when you're lifting in the dark area, in part you're pushing the paint back into the paper, whereas with this technique the water is doing the job of moving the paint out of the way and then you're just soaking it up. So this is another technique you can use, so that in the right situation you can use cauliflowers to help you create the effect you're after. In this example, I'm going to show you how you can use this same effect that creates cauliflowers to help create interest in the foreground of your painting. If this was a landscape and this is the foreground area, a common technique used by a number of well-known watercolorists is to splatter water in the foreground to add some extra texture without adding too much detail. So what you can do is you can splatter paint and also water to create some interesting texture in the foreground, which includes creating some smaller and controlled cauliflowers that just help to add a bit more interest into the foreground area and give you a nice lead in into your painting. So again, we look at this, it's very wet. So if I was to go into that, I'll go in with a little bit of thicker paint. We apply a little bit of splatter. You can see here that we're not getting cauliflowers, but we're just getting little soft wet on wet shapes. So when this loses its shine, I'll go in with some clean water to add some sharper edge cauliflower effects here. We can use that same effect to create some other interesting shapes in your painting. I think you can see from all of this that timing is very important when you're talking about the creation of cauliflowers. I think students create cauliflowers because they stop looking at their paper and observing just how wet it is before going in with some more paint. It's totally understandable when you're first learning to paint with watercolour. It can be a very tough medium and there are so many things to remember. But sooner that you get into the habit of having a quick look at your paper, quick look at your brush and the mixture you're putting onto the paper before you touch the paper, the better your watercolours will be. Alright, so now if I get just some clean water, you can now see how these cauliflowers are appearing. You can use them to create texture on rocks. I could turn these into some sort of rock shape if I wanted to. Sometimes it's just to break up the foreground. And you can use it to create tracks in your painting. If you have a rock, something like that. We'll let that dry a little bit. I'll speed things up with a hairdryer. The hairdryer is probably not the best thing for drying something like this because it doesn't dry it evenly. Just drop water in. And here you have multiple cauliflowers merging into one another and creating some interesting shapes. So again, depending on how wet the surface is, you'll get different effects occurring. So I hope this video has given you a better understanding of watercolour cauliflowers and what causes them, so that in the future you only create them when you want to, rather than have it happen unexpectedly, which can ruin your painting. If you've enjoyed this video and have not subscribed to my channel, I would appreciate it if you like and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you'll find out about each new video I produce when I upload it. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.